I know I put the spoiler warning up as usual, but in this video I'll be discussing and showing a lot of stuff from the third act of the movie in question. Don't watch this if you haven't seen it yet and have any desire to do so, which you should because it's good. Today I'd like to talk about villains and antagonists, and the difference between the two. A villain is a character who does bad, i.e. very immoral, things within a story. An antagonist is a character who opposes and obstructs the protagonist from achieving their objectives. Typically, the same characters occupy both these roles, but there are many examples in which things are not so clear-cut. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Loki is consistently a villain, but is not always in an antagonistic role in the story. In Thor, he's both. In the Avengers, both again. Then in the Dark World, he's an ally of Thor for more of the running time than he is an antagonist. Then in Ragnarok, it's the same thing again. Then there's the character Michael Caffey, played by Jason Isaacs in one of the most underappreciated television series ever, Brotherhood. He's a villain, yet he's also one of the two protagonists of the show. The other protagonist is corrupt and often acts immorally, but not to the extent of being a consistent villain like Michael Caffey is. Go out and find that show if you haven't seen it, by the way. It's like the Irish-American version of The Sopranos meets a loose reimagining of the Whitey Bulger/Billy Bulger true crime story, shifted from Irish neighborhoods in Boston to Irish neighborhoods in Providence. And it's a fuckload better than Black Mass, that's for damn sure. But mainly in this video, I'd like to talk about Spider-Man Homecoming. I could do a whole other minisode about how Homecoming presents a more faithful and realistic version of the character than the previous two cinematic incarnations combined, and maybe someday I will. But today I want to talk about the Vulture, or as he's more known within the film, Toomes, played by Michael Keaton. By the way, isn't it kind of funny how in my last video I brought up Birdman, and now I'm talking about the same actor playing the Vulture? One of the common complaints about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that the villains are usually lackluster, with the attention being paid mainly to developing interesting heroes and supporting characters. Then Joss Whedon flipped that for the Avengers, and made the villain the most interesting character in the movie, which was genius because it meant the heroes didn't have to compete with each other for that spotlight. He tried the same thing again in Age of Ultron, but didn't nail it. Now the Russo brothers are apparently following the same thinking with Infinity War, even suggesting in interviews that a lot of the film is from the perspective of Thanos. Just as with almost every decision they've made, this was the right call in terms of franchise building, to let the heroes shine in their standalone films and then have the villains shine in the team-ups. But it does have the unfortunate side effect of making most of the villains bland and uninteresting. I mean, just look at this assortment of who the hell cares. Ronan the Accuser was especially galling for me because I'm a big fan of the Guardians comics, and in the comics he's a multi-layered and very sympathetic character with complex motivations, while in the movie he's an insane terrorist who wants to kill billions of people. That's why Toomes was such a good move. He was a breath of fresh air for the MCU. Toomes is without question the film's antagonist. His goals and the goals of the protagonist are completely at odds with each other. They are diametrically opposed. But is Toomes a villain? He and his crew don't conduct themselves with the kind of murderous mentality that is typical of antagonists in the MCU, or comic books in general. Think about how some of the others reacted to their origin stories. Whiplash believes his dad was screwed over by Howard Stark, and he reacts to this by killing a bunch of people. Eldritch Killian is insulted and ignored by Tony Stark, and he reacts to this by killing a bunch of people. Well, here's what happened to Toomes and his crew.
I have a city contract to salvage all this, okay, with the city.
I apologize, Mr. Toomes, but all salvage operations are now under our jurisdiction. Please turn over any and all exotic materials that you've collected, or you will be prosecuted.
Ma'am, what am... Oh, please, come here. Rita, come on. Look, I bought trucks for this job. I brought in a whole new crew. These guys have a family. I have a family. I'm all in on this. I could lose my house.
I'm sorry, sir. There's nothing I can do.
Unlike other Marvel antagonists, their reaction was actually reasonable. They don't just go around killing people. Aside from when Toomes kills the first Shocker.
Damn. I thought this was the anti-gravity gun.
What? No, that's that one.
But given that he wasn't using the weapon he thought he was, and that the weapon he thought he was using sounds less lethal, he may not have even been intending to kill him. They steal stuff instead of handing it over like they were supposed to, but A, the government had an obligation towards them and also didn't do what it was supposed to, and left Toomes and his guys with no compensation or recourse, and B, throughout the film we are shown that Toomes and his crew aren't greedy, Toomes doesn't become a millionaire, his house isn't a dump, but it's also not a mansion, and his daughter attends a public high school. And finally, C. Movie morality is not such that being a professional thief automatically makes you a villain. In Rafifi, for example, the protagonists are a gang of thieves on a heist, but their actions are not painted as villainous by the film, even though one of them beats the crap out of his ex-girlfriend. Good old 1950s values. So given how Toomes is portrayed in the film, it is my assertion that he is an anti-villain, which is an antagonist who is not evil, just someone whose goals are incompatible with the goals of the protagonist. Side note, I'm not a big fan of TV tropes, because they often get things wrong. Like in their article on anti-villains, they say, a villain with heroic goals, personality traits, or virtues. There's no such thing, that's a contradiction in terms. Anti-villains are not villains, in the same way that anti-heroes are not heroes, though they are protagonists. Marvel slams home the point that Toomes is an anti-villain with the end credits scene.
Look who it is. What are the odds you and I'd end up at the same summer camp? Relax. It's not on you. It's on our little spider friend. I've got some boys on the outside who'd love to meet him. You know, take a picture, slice his throat, put his head in a dryer. And I heard a rumor. You know who he is.
If I knew who he was, he'd already be dead.
And yes, Toomes' crew are underworld arms dealers supplying weapons to violent organized crime groups, but as Toomes points out to Peter, Tony Stark was an arms dealer too.
You're young. You don't understand how the world works.
Yeah, but I understand that selling weapons to criminals is wrong.
How do you think your buddy Stark paid for that tower? Or any of his little toys? Those people, Pete, those people up there, the rich and the powerful, they do whatever they want. Guys like us, like you and me, they don't care about us. We build their roads and we fight all their wars and everything. They don't care about us. We have to pick up after them. We have to eat their table scraps.
Society deems this okay because the people being killed by his weapons are on the other side of the world. The MCU has repeatedly shown us the harm that this has caused to so many people.
Roll under the bed and the second shell hits, but it doesn't go off. It just sits there in the rubble, 3 feet from our faces. And on the side of the shell is painted one word: Stark.
And given that the Iron Man and War Machine suits are themselves weapons, he's still a weapons manufacturer now, just of a different sort. Tony Stark doesn't have to go to jail for any of the suffering he's caused, because he was born into a wealthy and powerful family, whose immoral acts were conducted to assist the government. And to top it off, it's him who is behind the city government tearing up Toomes' contract.
The joint venture between Stark Industries and the federal government, the Department of Damage Control, will oversee the collection and storage of alien and other exotic materials.
So now the assholes who made this mess are getting paid to clean it up?
Yeah, it's all rigged.
In order to be an underworld arms dealer, Toomes has to have a couple of enforcers in his crew. And Toomes fails to choose particularly well when it comes to choosing these enforcer types. But that's not a bad thing in terms of the quality of the film. He's a flawed character. Homecoming is, in many ways, a movie about flawed characters. Peter Parker screws up several times in the film, as does Tony Stark, but they all make the right decision in the end. Tony gives Peter the credit he deserves, Peter refuses to walk away or give up despite crippling self-doubt, and Toomes doesn't throw Peter under the bus after being arrested because of him. These are flawed characters who do the right thing when it counts the most. Whether or not you agree with me that Toomes is an anti-villain, one thing I think we can all agree on is that it's just nice to have an antagonist in the MCU that can actually be analyzed in this way. Instead of, I'm a baddie. Me too! Well, that's all I've got for today. Originally in this video I was going to be talking about the film Baby Driver here as well, because it too plays around a lot with the difference between villains and antagonists, but after I wrote that part of the script I just found that it wasn't as interesting as I thought it was going to be, so I cut it. Okay, well that's all from me for now. Have a wonderful day, everyone.